Welcome to Terrifying Tales, where the shadows come alive and the night whispers its darkest secrets. Here we delve into the eerie, unsettling, and the spine-chilling stories that haunt your dreams. From ancient curses to haunted houses, twisted legends to unexplained phenomena, we bring you the stories that send shivers down your spine and leave you questioning what lurks just beyond the edge of the light. Whether you're a fan of the supernatural or simply love a good scare, this is the place where your fears are brought to life. The small rural town of Yellowknife, Canada had always been a quiet place. Forgotten dot on the map, nestled between the dense forests and rolling hills of the Midwest. The kind of place where the only noise after sunset was the wind rustling through the trees, the occasional hoot of an owl, or the distant bark of a dog. It was the kind of town where everyone knew everyone else, and secrets were rare, or so they thought. For Hannah Reeves, Yellowknife had never been home. She had moved there reluctantly, following a messy divorce and a desperate need for a change of scenery. She rented a small, rundown house at the edge of town, backyard merging seamlessly into the forest. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She worked at the local diner, and in her free time, she often took long walks in the woods, seeking solace and clarity among the trees. But one evening, everything changed. It started with a light. Strange, pulsing light that appeared in the sky one evening as she walked the narrow, winding path through the forest. It wasn't like the stars or the moon. It was too bright, too erratic. Flickered like a heartbeat, growing in intensity with each pulse. Hannah stopped, her breath visible in the chilly evening air, and watched as the light hovered silently, then darted to the left and right, moving in ways no aircraft could. Curiosity gripped her. She had heard the rumors in town, whispers of strange things happening in the woods at night. Lights in the sky, lost time, eerie sounds. She dismissed them as local folklore, kind of stories told to keep kids from wandering too far from home. But now, standing there, she felt an inexplicable pull, compulsion to follow the light deeper into the woods. She moved carefully, her footsteps crunching on the frost-covered leaves. The light seemed to respond to her movement, retreating deeper into the forest as if leading her somewhere. She should have turned back. Something inside her, quiet, insistent voice, urged her forward. She walked for what felt like hours, the trees growing denser, the air colder. The light remained just out of reach, always a few steps ahead. Finally, she stumbled into a small clearing, and the light stopped. It hovered there, a glowing orb suspended in the air, pulsing steadily. She stood, mesmerized, her breath caught in her throat. Then, as if sensing her presence, the light slowly descended to the ground. It wasn't a light at all. It was a craft, small and metallic, with a surface that seemed to ripple like liquid silver. Anna's heart raced. He wasn't alone. From the shadows emerged three figures, tall and slender, with elongated limbs and large, dark eyes that seemed to absorb the faint light of the clearing. They moved with an unnatural grace, their heads tilting slightly as they regarded her. Hannah should have been terrified, but she wasn't. She felt calm, a strange, invasive calm, as if something was pressing down on her emotions, smothering the fear. A voice echoed in her mind, soft and melodic, speaking in a language she didn't understand, yet somehow she knew what it meant. They were asking her to come closer, to join them. She took a step forward, her legs moving of their own accord. She didn't want to. She couldn't resist. The calmness that had settled over her was growing, turning into a warm, almost euphoric sensation. She took another step, then another. Suddenly, a high-pitched metallic sound pierced the air. The euphoria vanished, replaced by a sharp, agonizing pain in her head. She collapsed to her knees, clutching her temples, her vision blurring. Figures recoiled, their heads snapping toward the direction of the sound. From the trees, a man emerged. Tall, thin man with wild hair and eyes that darted nervously between her and the figures. He held a small device in his hand, and the sound seemed to emanate from it. "Get up," he shouted, his voice cutting through the ringing in her ears. "Get up now!" Hannah forced herself to her feet, her legs trembling. Figures began to advance, their movements more erratic now, their calm demeanor replaced by something more predatory. The man adjusted the device, and the sound grew louder. Figures stopped, their heads twitching in unison. The man grabbed her arm and pulled her away from the clearing, back into the forest. Who are you?" she managed to gasp, stumbling after him. "Doesn't matter," he replied. "They're trying to make contact. You don't want that." He led her deeper into the woods, taking a circuitous route as if trying to throw off their pursuers. Sound from the device eventually faded, replaced by the natural noises of the forest. After what felt like an eternity, they reached a small, abandoned cabin. He pushed open the door and ushered her inside. "They'll be back," he said, closing the door and securing it with a heavy beam. "They'd always come back." Hannah sat down on an old dusty chair, her head still spinning. What were they?" "Alien," he said bluntly, pacing the room. "Extraterrestrials. They've been here for years, experimenting, studying. They've made contact with a few people. People like you. But it's never good. They manipulate your mind, make you think they're friendly, that they want to help, but they don't." Hannah stared at him, trying to process everything. "Why me?" He stopped and looked at her, his eyes dark and intense. "They choose people who are isolated, who won't be missed. People who are already broken." A cold chill ran down her spine. She wanted to argue, to deny it, but she couldn't. She felt something deep within her, a crack that had been there long before tonight. "They call it a close encounter of the fifth kind," he continued. "Direct communication. But it's more like possession. They get inside your head, and once they're there, they never really leave." Suddenly, a low hum filled the room, vibrating through the walls. The lights flickered, and the temperature dropped. The man's face paled. "They're here." The door began to rattle, and a blinding light flooded through the cracks in the wood. The man grabbed the device again and adjusted it, but this time, nothing happened. The hum grew louder, almost deafening, and Hannah felt a pressure in her head, the same warm calmness creeping back. She tried to fight it, but it was stronger now, more insistent. "They've chosen you," the man said, his voice barely audible over the noise. "You have to resist. Don't let them in." But it was too late. The door burst open, and the figures were there, their eyes locking onto hers. She felt their presence in her mind, a cold, probing sensation that pushed deeper, past her thoughts and memories, into something more fundamental. She wanted to scream, to run, but her body wouldn't obey. She could feel them pulling her, drawing her away from herself, away from everything she'd ever been. The last thing she saw was the man, desperately trying to adjust the device, his face twisted in fear and frustration. And then, his head was bent downwards. Hannah was found the next morning, lying in the clearing, her eyes wide open, staring blankly at the sky. The search party had been looking for her all night, after she had failed to return home. The doctor said she was in a catatonic state, unresponsive to any stimuli. There were no signs of trauma, no indication of what had happened to her. Weeks passed, then months. She remained in a psychiatric ward, her body functioning, but her mind somewhere far away. The townsfolk whispered about the strange lights in the woods, about the man who had vanished without a trace. But no one had answers. Hannah was there, yet she wasn't. She could feel them, deep in the recesses of her mind, whispering to her, calling her. She was lost between worlds, trapped in a silence that stretched on forever. In the end, she had made contact, but it wasn't the contact she had hoped for. It wasn't salvation or understanding. it was a void, a darkness that consumed everything it touched. And she was its latest victim. Her consciousness imprisoned in empty space while her body lay in Yellowknife. As our mind and body are one, Hannah's was millions of miles apart. Years passed, and the world outside continued to turn. Yellowknife remained unchanged, the same sleepy town with the same quiet streets. But for those who knew Hannah Reeves, time felt like a cruel trick, a slow, agonizing crawl toward nothing. Hannah's body lay in a hospital bed in the nearby city, her eyes still wide open, staring into a void only she could see. She hadn't aged much, her body sustained by machines and the steady drip of IV fluids. To everyone else, she was gone, a living ghost. But not to Lily. Lily Reeves was only 12 when her mother disappeared into the woods. She remembered the day vividly. As her parents had split up when she was a child, she often remembered her mother visiting each holiday. The warm feeling Lily gets from her mother is a unique blend of comfort, love, and security. It's the sensation of being enveloped in unconditional care, where her worries fade away in the presence of her mother. This warmth comes from the soothing touch of her hand, the gentle tone of her voice, and the familiarity of her presence. It's a sense of belonging and safety, like being wrapped in a soft blanket on a cold day, knowing that everything will be okay simply because she is near. After time passed, Hannah stopped visiting, not knowing why. Lily asked her father, but his response was cold and distant. "I don't know, and I don't care," father replied. Now, at 19, Lily decided to drive to Yellowknife to uncover the truth. Lily has been in contact with the hospital for years and done many research on her mother's condition. Lily was fierce, headstrong, with a desperate determination that bordered on obsession. She digged through local folklore, reading every article on alien encounters, and even contacting fringe groups that claimed to know the truth. She wasn't interested in speculation. She wanted answers. She wanted her mother back. She drove the long, winding road into town one late autumn evening, the forest stretching on either side like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. Air was cold and thick with mist. The house her mother had once rented was still there, a sagging structure, barely holding itself together. She parked outside, feeling a strange familiarity in the air, a sense that something had been waiting for her all these years. Lily took a deep breath and stepped out of the car, her boots crunching on the gravel. She had brought everything she might need: flashlight, a notebook filled with her mother's old scribbles, and a small black device she had managed to track down, a replica of the one the man supposedly used that night. She didn't know if it would work, but it was her only shot. She had spent months studying the CE5 protocols, learning how to initiate contact through meditation and mental focus. She didn't believe in any of it. She wasn't one for mysticism or faith, but she believed in her mother. And if there was even the slightest chance to bring her back, she had to try. As dusk settled into night, Lily walked into the forest, following the same path her mother had taken all those years ago. The woods were silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves. She reached the clearing just as the stars began to peek through the canopy, the same spot where Hannah had made contact. She sat down in the center, her breath visible in the cool night air, and closed her eyes. She focused, calming her mind, slowing her breathing. She reached out with her thoughts, imagining a thread extending from her consciousness into the vast unknown. She didn't know what she was doing, but she followed the instructions as best as she could. Hours passed, and nothing happened. The cold began to seep into her bones, and fatigue tugged at her eyelids. After hours have passed, Lily decided to leave the forest and went to the hospital where her mother lays. At first, Lily was hesitant in going to see her mother, as she didn't know what she would do or how she would react. But when Lily saw her mother in a vegetative state in the hospital, she stands frozen by the bedside, overwhelmed by the sight of the woman who once held her, now motionless and distant. The rhythmic hum of machines fills the room, but there's no response, no flicker of recognition in her mother's eyes. The once vibrant figure is now pale, fragile, and still, surrounded by sterile hospital equipment. A mix of helplessness, grief, and disbelief grips her heart as she struggles to reconcile the memories of her mother's warmth and laughter with the unresponsive body before her, suspended in a world beyond reach. Lily stands at the foot of the bed, her eyes fixed on Hannah, her mother. The steady beep of the heart monitor pulses through the room, but the warmth of life seems absent. Hannah lies motionless, pale and unresponsive, trapped in a vegetative state. Lily's lips quiver as she struggles to hold back tears. She takes a deep breath, turns, and slowly walks toward the door, footsteps heavy with grief. As Lily exits the room, the hospital hallway is bustling. Nurses and doctors rush past, but she feels detached, her mind clouded. Her eyes glance around, searching for answers, but finding only despair. As she walks, her attention is drawn to a bulletin board. There are dozens of them, tacked one over the other. Faces of people who have disappeared stare back at her, some faded and worn, others freshly pinned. Their expressions are frozen in time, unaware of the pain they've left behind. Lily's brow furrows, her pulse quickens as she notices the sheer number. A glimpse inside another room. A man lies in bed, hooked up to the same machines as Hannah, also in a vegetative state. His family stands around him, eyes wide with a similar heartbreak to Lily's. They exchange glances, hoping for a sign of life, but there is none. Lily stumbles out of the hospital doors, the weight of what she's seen suffocating. Her eyes dart toward the lampposts, telephone poles, and walls. They are plastered with more missing persons posters. It's everywhere. Faces of loved ones lost, each one a story cut short. The world around her feels surreal, as if something is deeply wrong with this town. Lily stands in the street, surrounded by posters, the wind gently rustling the edges of the paper. She stares ahead, her mind reeling, trying to grasp the connection between the missing and the lifeless bodies inside. Lily walked back into the forest, this time focused and determined. Forest was alive with an eerie stillness, the kind that made every rustle of leaves and snap of a twig echo like a gunshot. Air felt charged, like the seconds before a storm. She walked deeper, her footsteps were slow, measured, each one a drumbeat in her chest. She reached the clearing, the center of the spiral, marked in Lily's notebook. She set down her backpack and took out the device, the small black one she had tracked down after years of searching. She didn't know if it would work, but it was the same type the man in the forest had reportedly used. She activated it, and a high-pitched tone filled the air, cutting through the silence like a blade. The device vibrated in her hand, and she felt a strange sensation in her head. Pressure. Pulling. Minutes passed, and again, nothing. Then she felt it. Presence. It was subtle at first, like a ripple in the air, a faint vibration. She opened her eyes, and there it was. The light flickered in the distance, pulsing softly, just as her mother had described. Lily's heart raced, but she forced herself to stay calm, to keep her focus. The light hovered closer, brighter, and then slowly descended to the ground. It was the craft, small, metallic, rippling like liquid silver. She stood, her body trembling with both fear and excitement. She knew she was close. The figures emerged from the shadows, just as they had for her mother. Tall, slender beings with large, dark eyes that seemed to see everything and nothing. They stood there, motionless, observing her. Lily raised the small black device and flicked it on. A high-pitched tone filled the clearing, and the figures twitched, their heads tilting in unison. She didn't know if it would work, but she had to try. "I know you're there," she said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her insides. "I know you have her. My mother. Anna Reeves." The beings didn't move, but she felt their presence more intensely now, a probing sensation at the edge of her mind. She could feel them trying to reach her thoughts, but she pushed back, focusing on the one thing she wanted. "I offer a trade," she continued with her voice weak, as tears came down her cheek. "Bring her back. Take me instead." There was a moment of silence, a stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. Then she felt it. A response. Not words, but a feeling, an understanding. She saw flashes in her mind, her mother wandering through a vast, empty space, her consciousness lost in a sea of stars. She saw herself standing in the clearing, her offer hanging in the air like a lifeline. And she felt their interest, their curiosity. The beings stepped closer, and Lily felt a coldness seep into her mind, a void pressing in on all sides. She knew they were considering her offer, weighing it. She didn't know what they wanted, what their end game was, but she didn't care. She just wanted her mother back. "Take me," she whispered. "Bring her back." The beings moved closer still, and suddenly the light around them intensified. blinding her. She felt a sharp, searing pain in her head, and for a moment she thought she was dying. But then she saw something. Her mother. She couldn't explain it, but she could see a vague figure of her mother standing before her, her eyes wide with fear and confusion. "Hannah," Lily whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Mom?" Her mother's eyes focused on her, recognition dawning. "Lily? What are you doing here? Where am I?" Tears streamed down Lily's face. "I made a deal, Mom. I'm bringing you back. You're going to be okay." Hannah looked around, panic setting in. "No, Lily, you don't understand. You shouldn't have come here." But it was too late. The light around them grew blinding, the figures moving closer, and Lily felt herself slipping away. The coldness enveloped her, and she felt her mind being pulled, drawn into that same void where her mother had been lost. She didn't resist. She had made her choice. Hannah's consciousness flooded back into her body, her senses returning like a rush of air after being underwater for too long. She gasped, her eyes blinking rapidly as she tried to make sense of her surroundings. She was back in the hospital, the figures gone, the craft vanished. She was free. But Lily was gone. Days later, Hannah sat by her daughter's hospital bed, holding her lifeless hand. Lily's body was there, her chest rising and falling with the help of a ventilator, but her eyes were empty, staring into that same void Hannah had known for so long. The doctors said she was in a vegetative state, her brain activity minimal. Hannah knew better. She could feel it, the presence, the void. They had taken her daughter in exchange for her own mind, a cruel, twisted bargain. She had her body back, but her soul was hollow, haunted by the knowledge of what she had lost. Imprisonment for decades. She visited Lily every day, reading to her, talking to her, hoping that somehow, somewhere, her daughter could hear her. She told her stories of their life before, of all the things they would do when she woke up. But deep down, she knew the truth. The silence that stretched between them was the same silence that had once consumed her. A silence that was vast, endless, and unforgiving.
Thank you for joining us on this chilling journey into the unknown. If our tales sent shivers down your spine, be sure to hit that like button and subscribe to Terrifying Tales for more stories that will haunt your nights. Don't forget to ring the bells so you never miss a new tale of terror. Have a story you want us to explore? Drop it in the comments below. We're always on the hunt for the next haunting tale.